This is the Roni kit that I got from CAA. It takes a Glock handgun. It has a 16-inch barrel, which makes it into a rifle. Right, 16-inch barrel. Well, recently they just sent me their new pistol stabilized kit. This. I'll show it to you side by side so you can see, compare them. Okay, this one has a stock and it's a lot longer, so the barrel is covered up. However, you can take the Glock from the carbine kit and shove it inside. Now, because it has a 16-inch barrel, this is now a rifle and not pistol. And even though it has a stabilizing brace, I can shoulder it, because it is a rifle. If it didn't have that huge barrel, it would be a pistol and I would not be able to shoulder it. And we'll convert this to a pistol. Need the charging handle. Okay, now it's turned into a pistol. I can cheek it legally, but I can't let this touch my shoulder while shooting it. But otherwise, the operation is still the same. I'm not sure how well this is going to work as a cheek rest. One thing I noticed, and it's the same on the rifle, there are these metal screws that go right in here, here, and here. When I rack this charging handle, this screw sticks out a bit because I'm too lazy to tighten it. This one is not that bad because when you tighten this one, you can just use your fingers. It sticks out far enough that I can use my fingers. This one is recessed, and I hate having to unscrew it with the screwdriver, so I just pulled the whole thing out. Earlier, I had it sticking out, and when I racked the charging handle, the sharp corners on this little screw scratched my knuckle and made me bleed a little bit, so I'm not going to use that. Operation-wise, it's still the same as the rifle kit. Now, some things I noticed, the length of pull on the rifle is actually shorter. You can see I'm lining up the chassis. So you can see here there's a section of Picatinny Rail that's missing. Well, not missing, but there's just no Picatinny Rail there. Whereas on this pistol, the Picatinny Rail goes all the way to this seam right here where the cheek rest touches the back of the receiver. And if I line those up, just length of pull on the rifle is shorter. Now, there is no adjustment for this stabilizing brace. It can't really come out. It can't be adjusted, I should say. Now, as a stabilizer, as intended, this is the same design as the SIG brace or SB Tactical. In fact, I spoke with Alex Bosco, and it is his, he licensed this design concept to CAA, and they went with it, and it works. It works well, as intended. If you want to one hand, or you want a little bit of stabilizing, if in case your hands are kind of weak, I'm not even using any of my fingers to hold this gun up. I can just point at it, and I can pull the trigger. Right, first check, gun is empty. Right, not even my thumb is on this gun. I can pull the trigger and fire this gun. One thing I noticed with the rifle and this pistol setup, especially when it's locked on my arm with a brace on, my thumb doesn't quite hit the magazine release. as nicely as I would like. So I think an extended one would be better. I kind of have to adjust my grip a little bit. It's real hard to adjust my grip when it's locked inside this brace. If I use this as a cheek rest, then yeah, I can still hit the magazine release. It'll be easier if I don't use a stock magazine release and use an extended one. This pistol kit comes with this barrel shroud thing that goes inside here, and there's actually two indentations, or two markings, one for 17, one for 19. You slide this back, so if you put a Glock 19 in here, this part butts up against the front of the slide, and the barrel kind of goes inside this hole a little bit. I removed it because I realized that with this pistol setup, or if you have an SBR, you could actually run a suppressor through this gigantic opening. I don't have my pistol suppressor just yet. I'm waiting for it to come back from ATF, or the approval to come back from ATF. So, and I don't have a pistol can on me from Silencer Shop to test out, but they're coming, and I'll definitely test this out later. However, I do have this. This is a Spike's Tactical Barking Spider. I removed the internals, the guts out of it, and it's, you know, diameter-wise, it's about the size of your average pistol can, 9mm pistol can. And look, I can stick it in, thread it onto the threaded barrel. Now, pretend that's longer and it's actually a suppressor. I think this will work. I still have to function test it and test fire to see if the gun can cycle. But since this almost touches the receiver, I'm not sure how well this is going to work. Now, this is just a gigantic weight at the end of the barrel, and on a real pistol suppressor, you'll have a Nielsen device, and as the slide slides back, the barrel will tilt up a little bit and bring the suppressor away from the receiver, possibly. I think you can run this suppressed, which would be very, very cool, because then you put optics, lasers. You could put a vertical grip on this if you wanted to keep it as a pistol, unless you pay the $5 tax stamp. But yeah, so far it's very small. It fits in my 511 select carry bag as is, even with an optic. There we go. This is just some Chinese knockoff optic I have lying around, but it works very, very well. One thing you can do with this, and it's fine with a pistol, you are allowed to put a bipod on a pistol. However, you're not allowed to put a vertical grip. And this is all things that people have done. They have put bipods on handguns. You can even grab the bipod like this, and that's perfectly fine and allowed. Is this more stable? Probably not compared to this. I think grabbing it kind of like you would an AR-15 barrel shroud handguard would make it a lot more stable. No, it's not touching my shoulder. But you have options with these side rails, and with the CAA side-mounted bipod legs, you still have the bottom Picatinny Rail free to mount a light or a laser. Right? So you could run a light, laser, extended magazine, bipod legs on this, and then potentially a suppressor. Now, one thing about the Roni pistol stabilizer kit that I do not really like, when you open this thing up, in order to open this half of the chassis, the cheek rest of the stabilizer gets in the way. So it's soft and pliable. You have to lift it up, and then you can lift this open. I don't really like that. One thing that I looked at this, the chassis is the same chassis between here and here, right? Here and here, everything in between is almost the same except for the Picatinny Rail on top. On the stock kit, on the rifle, the Picatinny Rail has these holes right in here. If you can see that, there's holes, kind of like what's on a AR-15 stock buffer tube. And when you press the button on the stock, it releases the detent, and you can have length of pull adjustment. Now, I figured out if you remove these 3 screws in here, which I already did, and there's 2 screws in here, that frees up the rail and this metal bar. Well, yeah, aluminum. And you can actually slide this out a little bit and change the length of pull on the pistol stabilizer. Now, there is a plastic plate that goes up inside here, but because the way of the indentations that's inside this metal bar, there's a big fat one and a real skinny one, you can't really use this. Now, you could cut notches in it to put this thing back in, but you don't really need this plate. Really all you need is to, I'm not going to screw them together right now, but you would screw the screws back on the rail. You would put your Glock inside. Now, I've actually increased my length of pull by about 3/4 of an inch. Originally, this part of the cheek rest was right up against here. Now, that's the second to last notch. I've tried it on the most rearward position, and this does clear this part of the hatch of the opening part of the chassis. But the stock is kind of loose when you do that. Or stock, the stabilizer is a little bit loose. Is it really that important? Because it's not a stock, and it's on the last detent. You know, it's up to you. You're modifying things. Now, this modification is totally reversible. You can put it back together as it was assembled from factory. But I have done a slight modification. As I said before, there's a big opening. This muzzle device thing is normally inside here. You just unscrew it and it pulls right out. Actually, you have to unscrew these 2 screws, pull this rail out, open the hatch, and this whole front end can slide off, and then you can pull this out from in here. Now, one thing I've always wanted to try with the rifle kit, and it wouldn't work, was to put a Glock 34-35 long slide inside this chassis. And I've been able to get it to work. There is some material that interferes with the slide of the long slide Glocks. Glock 34, I have a Glock 35 in here with a 9mm conversion barrel. Actually, let's screw those screws back in, just so this thing doesn't fall apart. Just for now. As you can see, it cycles. I'll have to do a live fire test on this. But everything, it's still solid, it's locked. Mostly what's holding this gun in is this little part back here, and the trigger guard, and the slot in the frame for the accessory rail. particular reason, this is not activating my... Nope, it's just that magazine. Okay. So I think this will work with my long slide Glock. And let's open back up. And I'll show you what I did to make this work. As I said before, you have to unscrew these two screws here. And then the plastic polymer rail can be removed. That's what actually holds this front end. So once you remove this rail, this slides off. Now, inside here, you see this sort of semicircular protrusion. It used to come all the way down to here. So you see this sort of half shroud? It actually came all the way to here, to the 6 o'clock position. I cut that away, and then inside here there was, I don't know, a little bit of plastic that on a normal Glock 17 kind of comes up and blocks this area a little bit. I don't know what that's for. It doesn't actually hold the gun in place. As I said, what holds the gun in place is this little indentation, which lines up with the beaver tail of the Glock, the trigger guard that prevents it from going forward, and then the third contact point is the accessory rail slot that you see here. So anything in the front of the gun is not really necessary, and it's not really a safety thing. I don't know why it's there. So once you remove this little bit of plastic here, and just for peace of mind, I removed this piece of plastic, a Glock 34 long slide can now be put inside here. Okay, and there you go. You have a Glock 35 inside a Roni chassis. Oh, something else I want to try to do, and we'll have to test fire and see if it functions in cycles. Empty. Yeah, I'm not sure how well that's going to work, because on a Glock 17, the slide meets up with this fat part in the barrel and centers that barrel. Now this barrel is very loose. See how it just wiggles up and down? However, it does afford us some interesting opportunities. I'll have to see if this will actually work. Now I have a Glock 35 with a 16-inch barrel. Now this becomes a rifle. I can shoulder it, and we'll have to see test fire to see if it actually functions, if it fires in this setup. Because if that's the case, I will then modify this setup so that I can put that gun inside here. And the reason why you want to do that, I'm sure people are going to say, well, why not just get a Glock 17 and put the Glock 17 inside here? The reason why I got this is for USPSA, to take one of my Glocks, put it in here, and shoot pistol caliber carbine. Now, there is a lot of competitive shooters who aren't that tactical and will have, you know, a Glock 17 and a Glock 34. Most of them are just competitive and shoot Glock 34s. So if you can get a Glock 34 to work in this chassis, then opens it up to people who just shoot with Glock 34s. They can take the Glock 34 and throw it in here and not have to buy another slide. I mean, I guess you could get a Glock 17 slide and make it work that way with your Glock 34s. So, yeah, there's that. But all you have to do is modify, just trim a little bit of plastic and get a Glock 34 to work inside here. Hey, all the better. Now, I wanted to show what happens when you take a Glock 34 long slide with a 16-inch barrel and stick it inside this carbine chassis with no modifications, right? It looks like it fits in there. I don't know if it's kind of hard to see, but this piece of plastic, which is the part I cut off earlier on the pistol version, the dust cover, if you want to call it the dust cover, the extended part of the slide, is sitting on top of that, and it's actually lifting the slide just a little bit. Doesn't seem like such a big deal, right? Let's close this up. Look at that. I cannot cycle the slide. It will not cycle. That little bit of tilt is interfering with everything, and this gun will not work. So, if you trim that little plastic, in theory, that should allow this Glock 34 to work. The bigger question is whether or not the Glock 34, 35 will work with the 16-inch barrel. It wasn't designed to go in a 34, so the parts of the barrel that normally interact with the Glock 17 slide do not interact with the Glock 34 slide or 35 slide. Not sure if you can see that right here, but this part narrows down right in here, and then it gets fat, and then it narrows down here, and there's a little ring here. When that's in a Glock 17, though, right, the slide pulls back, and then as it comes forward, this fat part goes inside the slide and it centers the slide, or centers the barrel in the slide. Stupid recoil spring. Okay. Very little, there's a little bit of play. A little bit, but not as bad as the Glock 34, because the Glock 34 slide, 35 slide, was way out here where the barrel gets thin again, and there's a lot of play. So I'll resume later when I go to the range and test fire this setup, this Franken stuff with the Ronis, and see if I can get a Glock 34 to work. I think with the pistol chassis, it'll work just fine. With the carbine, maybe, maybe not. One thing that I'm not sure, and I don't really want to ask ATF, typically you have to have a 16-inch barrel in order to have a stock on a pistol, right, to make it a rifle. Plus there's other details like overall length, it's got to be over 26 inches, yada, 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 yada. However, with this huge chassis, there is no way to shoot a pistol with a stock and not have this humongous thing on here. Yes, you could remove it with tools, but that's not the point. My thinking is, do you really need the 16-inch barrel? I propose, theoretically, that you don't really need that 16-inch barrel. For safety's sake, yes, I believe you do. Because if you're holding anywhere out here, right, your barrel stops right about there. And highly unlikely that a bullet would all of a sudden just veer 90 degrees. But your hand is in front of the muzzle now. and the only thing that's protecting your hand is some polymer, the bullet could go through that. So, if you had a handgun in this setup, does that make it an SBR? I don't know. You have all this plastic shroud. It is a shroud. It's loosely a barrel shroud. There's no way to fire it with a stock and not have this huge thing on here. If you did, that would be an SBR. But with this long attachment on here, it's almost like having a gigantic shroud on a barrel. So, I don't know. That's a hypothetical, something to discuss and debate whether or not you do need a 16-inch barrel in this setup, or could you just shove a handgun in here and just shoot it as is?